Manji, the CEO of Twiga Tours. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. First of all, we've seen the trend and how it happened since 2008 during the post-election violence, and then Westgate and the other terrorism attacks that have come after that. And we saw how it badly impacted the tourism industry. How is it currently?
Well, you know, first and foremost, it's important to understand that this is different from the post-election violence in the sense that we've been seeing regular bomb blasts or security situations around the country, especially Mombasa and Nairobi. So first and foremost, we have to be mindful that this might be a problem that may stay with us for a longer time than we envisage.
So how are you dealing with it as stakeholders? Before the government comes in, how are you dealing with the situation as stakeholders?
Well, this morning I was actually fortunate enough to attend a tourism crisis meeting. And it's very important that the stakeholders have understood that we have a major issue at hand. This is going to be, if not a short-term, at least a medium-term problem. And therefore, we need to address it accordingly. It's not a problem that we can see will terminate tomorrow. You know, it's been recurring from Westgate, and then we've had several other incidents in Mombasa and Nairobi. So the industry is now united in its approach, in that we must, first and foremost, have a very good international or local PR campaign.
Yes.
You see, this is very important. If you look at other destinations that have gone through what we are going through now, for example, if you look at Sri Lanka all those years ago, they still continued to manage their tourism in spite of their civil war. Egypt presently is going through really difficult times, but it manages its tourism, and until recently they were running 60 to 70% occupancy. Now that's because there is a face to all their campaigns. You know, I mean, if you look at our incident over the weekend, we've hardly had anybody who's actually stood up with a face and say to the world that, you know, this is not just our problem. It is a global problem. It is a problem that we've found ourselves in because we have tried to help international agendas. I mean, sending our KDF into Somalia was not a Kenyan issue. It is an issue that needed to be solved from a global perspective. So you see, this is important for the world to realize. And I can just go back a little bit and say, when we had the Boston Marathon incident last year, the world stood up and said, well, we will not be cowed by terrorism, or we will not you know, be blackmailed by terrorism, etc. But when it happens to a third world country like Kenya, then suddenly the world leaves us alone to solve our own problem. That isn't fair.
So who is going to stand up?
I think that the industry is making these efforts as I speak. We are, you know, making various approaches, not only just to the policymakers, but also reaching out to other interested parties. Now, again, it is not just a problem that's confined to tourism. We just heard from Willis in Mombasa that, you know, other sectors are also affected by such an incident. So this is a national problem. I think everybody as a Kenyan must embrace this problem, and that includes other corporate bodies, because from tourism you get a trickle-down effect. You know, the curio vendors are suffering, the manufacturers are suffering, so they all must rally around tourism stakeholders and actually come out with a great strategy and say, well, you know what, we need to have some sort of a face to speak on behalf of our country, and therefore we are all in it to do it together. But if it is left as a tourism problem, then I'm afraid it is going to take us longer to get out of this problem than it would if it was a national situation. So I think that I would agree at some point. I believe Dr. Leakey, although it was for a different reason, said that, you know, this is the president should declare this a national disaster. I think that at this point in time, The president has said that the tourism is in on its knees. I think it's time now for the policymakers and the nation to rally behind the stakeholders of tourism and actually address it as a national problem.
Now, in a sense, of course, the government is the largest shareholder within the tourism sector, because the majority of what comes in actually goes to the government, especially in terms of the tourism that comes from the international markets. So what are the stakeholders telling the government? What do you expect the government to do at this time? Or what sort of support do you want to receive from the government?
Well, besides, of course, addressing the issue of these incidents, and I'm quite pleased to see that as we speak, the Deputy President is having a crisis meeting with his security apparatus. But I think that it's also important for the government to bail out this industry, considering that it is a spark that usually ignites an economy that's on a downturn. We've seen it from the past, where we've had difficulty, the economy was on a downturn, and tourism picked up, and of course it gives a spark. So I think that the first and foremost the government must understand is that this industry is not to be looked at as an industry that is a very rich industry, and that the stakeholders are billionaires who can just fund such a recovery program. But they should come and understand that what is the fallout if they didn't help the industry. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is, and I was disappointed to read in the paper the other day, that just about 2 billion was allocated to an industry that generates 96 billion. That's not even 10%. And out of the 2 billion, 1.13 billion is recurrent expenditure. So you're actually leaving 800 million for marketing. That is $10 million. South Africa has a bigger budget than we have. They have something like $66 million to market their destination. Against this kind of competition, how does $10 million stand? Okay, yeah. And more importantly, we need to be able to convince our source markets, the traditional source markets like the United Kingdom, the USA, Europe, etc. Now this is a vast market. If you take $10 million, it's literally peanuts. So they must understand where and how this industry functions, and then give their support. That is what I would think. Mm-hmm.
Do you have an indication of how the occupancy is currently at the hotels?
Sadly, I just heard this morning that some hotels in Mombasa are running occupancies of 10, 12, 13%. If you look at the safari circuit, it's no better. As a tour operator, for this month, frankly, we are running at 0%. I mean, I have seen my entire fleet in my yard this morning, and it's really disheartening. Mm-hmm.
And how can the stakeholders within the tourism industry appeal to the regular Kenyans to plug that gap, at least for now?
This is a very important issue. If your economy isn't doing well in the first place, how do you ask the domestic traveler to travel? Now, just to look at as an example, the holidays exhibition at the Sarit Center has been a crowd puller in the past, with most hotels around the country, especially Mombasa, declaring sellouts. This year, I heard it wasn't so. It was not a crowd puller. People didn't book as they had done before, which tells you that obviously, in spite of the fantastic offers that were given to the domestic traveler, they weren't able to take advantage. Why is what we need to ask. Is it the economy? Is it the disposable income that people are short of? I would think that is the case.
Thank you so much, Minaz Manji, for giving us those highlights, and of course just a look into the impact of what we're seeing currently on the tourism sector. And of course we can only keep our fingers crossed and hope that the government does something about it. Well, Citizen Live at 1 takes a short break now. We'll be back with more after the break.